The sun had decided to show up, which Mr. Pierce seemed to take as a personal victory. He strode across the field with the particular energy of a PE teacher on his best day, clipboard tucked under one arm, whistle bouncing against his chest. The field had been divided and conquered. The sprinters were already warming up on the far track. A cluster of girls from Year 10 were stretching near the rounders pitch, and somewhere behind the main building, Jamie could hear the distant thwack of a tennis ball finding nobody's racket. Jamie stood with his hands in his hoodie pocket and watched all of it from a careful distance. He wasn't avoiding anything, exactly. He'd just learned over the years that if you positioned yourself at the edge of things, not quite absent, not quite present, people tended to leave you to it. It was a skill, like any other, just not one that appeared on any fixture list. Oi, you three, Mr. Pierce was pointing. The clipboard swung like a compass needle and landed, unerringly, on Jamie, on Mark, who was sitting on the grass scrolling on his phone, and on Zoe's brother Chris, who had been attempting to become invisible behind a very small tree. You're not just standing around on my sports day. Come on. Sir, I've got a note, Mark began. From last year, yes, I've seen it. It doesn't cover this year. Mr. Pierce was already walking. Netball court. The basket frames are up. Mrs. Osler needs bodies. Chris emerged from behind the tree, with the expression of someone being led to something unpleasant. Netball's a girls' game, Mark said, though quietly enough that it was more observation than protest. Jamie said nothing. He pulled his hoodie sleeves down over his hands and followed Mr. Pierce across the grass. And if there was something shifting quietly in his chest, something that felt, strangely, less like dread than its opposite, he kept that entirely to himself. The court was already half full. A loose game had started up, girls moving easily between positions, the ball arcing up and snapping through the net with a sound Jamie found, without knowing why, deeply satisfying. Mrs. Osler was a tall woman who coached with an air of calm that suggested she had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. She looked at the three boys arriving at the edge of her court. Good, she said simply. We're uneven. Do any of you know the rules? Silence. That's fine, they're simple. No walking with the ball. No contact. You pass, you move, you think. She looked at each of them in turn. The thinking is the part most people struggle with. Mark and Chris exchanged a look that meant this is beneath us, and communicated it so loudly they might as well have said it aloud. Jamie looked at the court, at the lines, chalked clean and white on the tarmac, at the ball, which was sitting at Mrs. Osler's feet, bright as something newly made. I'll try, he said. It came out more earnest than he'd intended. One of the girls, Priya, he thought, from his English class, glanced over at him with an expression that wasn't unkind. A small assessing look, then a small nod, like a door being left slightly ajar. Mrs. Osler handed him the ball. It was lighter than he expected. The first 10 minutes were chaos. Mark had decided, within approximately 30 seconds, that the best approach to netball was the same as his approach to most things. Be loud about it, take up space, and hope confidence covered the gaps. He'd intercepted 2 passes that weren't meant for him, argued a contact call, and been gently but firmly repositioned by Mrs. Osler 3 times. Chris had retreated into a kind of strategic uselessness, drifting just far enough from the action that the ball never quite reached him, which he seemed to consider a result. Jamie was trying to actually learn the game. This was, he would reflect later, probably what gave him away. He watched where people moved before they moved. He noticed that Priya always cut left after a pass, that the girl with the red scrunchie, he didn't know her name yet, had a throw that went high and slightly wide, and that the space nobody was standing in was usually where the ball needed to go next. He filed all of this away, without quite deciding to, the way you sometimes absorb things that interest you before you've admitted to yourself that they do. When the ball came to him the 3rd time, he caught it cleanly, turned, and found Priya already where he'd expected her to be. He passed. She shot. It went in. A small sound went up from the girls around him. Not quite a cheer, more like a collective note of surprise. Priya turned and pointed at him, grinning. Okay, she said. He can stay. By the halfway point, Mark had wandered off to find someone to complain to, and Chris had discovered a sudden and urgent need to visit the water station that he never quite returned from. Jamie didn't notice either of them leave. He was too busy thinking about left and wide, and the space nobody was standing in. Mrs. Osler called a pause and gathered them loosely at the centre of the court. She was talking about positioning, about how netball was less about pace than people assumed, and more about reading the court, reading your teammates, being somewhere useful before you were needed there. Jamie listened in a way he rarely listened to teachers. Not politely. Actually. "You've played before," Mrs. Osler said, and it took Jamie a moment to realise she was talking to him. "No," he said. She studied him briefly with the same calm, unshockable expression. "Well," she said, "you think like someone who has." She moved on. Priya caught his eye and raised her eyebrows in a way that meant "told you." Jamie looked down at his trainers. He could feel something warm in his face that he hoped wasn't visible. In the last 20 minutes, they played a proper game. Mrs. Osler put Jamie at centre, which he hadn't expected and wasn't sure he deserved, and for a while he was too aware of himself, too conscious of his arms, his feet, the way he was standing, to do much of anything. But the ball has a way of pulling you out of your own head when it needs to, and somewhere in the 4th or 5th passage of play, he stopped thinking about Jamie on a netball court and started just thinking about the game. He scored once. A short-range shot that he almost didn't take, that dropped through the net so cleanly it barely moved it. The sound it made, that small, clean swish, went through him like something tuning. The girls around him made noise. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. He couldn't have said exactly what the feeling was, standing in the middle of that court in the afternoon sun, with people moving around him, and the ball back in playness. But it was not a feeling he recognised from the rest of his life. It felt, he thought vaguely, right. Afterwards, when they were drifting back toward the main field and the rest of sports day was breaking up around them, Priya fell into step beside him. "You're good," she said, without any preamble. Like actually good, not just for someone who's never played. "I don't know about that, I do. I've been playing since year 5. She said it without arrogance, just as fact. "You think about where to be. Most people don't. They just chase the ball." She paused. "We train Tuesday and Thursday lunchtimes. And there's a proper session Saturday morning." Jamie kept walking. Ahead of him, Mark was performing a loud and detailed account of how the whole thing had been beneath him, for an audience of 2 who weren't particularly listening. "I don't know if..." Jamie started. "You don't have to decide now," Priya said easily. "I'm just letting you know." She peeled off toward a group of her friends, and that was that. Jamie walked back across the field. The sun was still high in the sky. Mr. Pierce was still striding. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago. Jamie put his hands in his hoodie pocket. Tuesday, he thought. Lunchtime. Tuesday, he nearly didn't go. He'd talked himself out of it on Sunday, back into it on Monday morning, and out of it again by Monday night. By Tuesday, he'd arrived at a kind of exhausted neutrality. Not a decision exactly, more a suspension of the argument with himself. He ate his lunch quickly, told nobody where he was going, and walked to the sports hall the long way round, which added 4 minutes and meant he arrived slightly late. The session had already started. Through the small window in the double doors, he could see them, 8 or 9 girls running a passing drill, the ball moving in clean triangles across the court. Mrs. Osler stood to one side with her clipboard, saying something he couldn't hear. The squeak of trainers on the hall floor, the bright snap of the ball from hand to hand. Jamie stood at the door for slightly too long. It was Priya who saw him through the glass. She didn't wave or make a production of it, just met his eyes and tilted her head toward the court, the way you might beckon someone into a room that was already warm. He pushed the door open. "Trainers?" said Mrs. Osler, by way of greeting. Jamie looked down at his feet. "Yes? Good. Find a bib from the bag, any colour, join Priya's group." That was all. No acknowledgement that he was new, or unexpected, or the only boy in the room. Mrs. Osler had clearly decided that the least remarkable way to treat his presence was as unremarkable, and Jamie found himself quietly grateful in a way he couldn't have explained. The bib was yellow, a loose mesh vest that he pulled over his head without thinking. It smelled of old sports halls and something like belonging, which he recognised immediately as a ridiculous thought, but had anyway. Priya made space for him in the drill without breaking rhythm. "Catch, turn, pass," she said. "That's all it is for now." He caught, he turned, he passed. After 2 circuits, he stopped thinking about what he looked like. By the 3rd Tuesday, he had a position. "Wing attack," Mrs. Osler said, because he moved well and read the game and had, she noted in her measured way, good hands. She said good hands the way another teacher might give a grade, briefly, factually, like something that had been assessed and recorded. Jamie held on to it for the rest of the day. The sessions had developed their own rhythm now, a shape he found himself orienting toward through the week. Monday felt like waiting. Wednesday felt like aftermath. Tuesday and Thursday had a quality of realness that the rest of school week had recently started to lack. He hadn't told anyone, not his mum, not the boys he sat with at lunch who hadn't noticed he was absent from it twice a week. The not telling had started as caution and quietly become something more like privacy, a space that was his, that hadn't been assessed or commented on or made into something to navigate. He was good at netball. That fact still sat slightly strangely, because he had never been good at anything physical, had in fact organised a significant portion of his personality around that absence. But here he was, catching, turning, passing, moving to the space before the ball arrived, feeling, twice a week, like the right size. It was Danny who raised the uniform question first. Danny was in year 11, tall and direct in the way of someone who had long ago decided that the most efficient path through any situation was a straight line. She played goal attack and had, in Jamie's estimation, the best shot on the team. She also had a habit of simply saying things. "We've got a friendly in 3 weeks," she said, dropping onto the bench beside him after Thursday's session. "St. Catherine's. Away." Jamie towelled off his face. "Right, you should play." He looked at her. "You're better than 2 people we'd take," she said, not unkindly, just accurately. "Mrs. Osler thinks so too. She just won't say it yet, because she doesn't want to make it weird." "It would be weird," Jamie said. "Why?" He gestured vaguely at the space between them, which was meant to indicate all of this, obviously, and Danny looked at the space and then back at him with an expression that suggested she found the gesture insufficient. "You're on the team," she said. "You come every Tuesday and Thursday. You just haven't signed the form yet." "There's a form?" "There's always a form." She stood up. "Also there's kit. But that's just practical, it's not." She stopped, and for the first time Danny seemed to choose her words rather than simply deploy them. "It doesn't have to be a thing," she said, "unless you want it to be." She picked up her bag and left him with that, which he suspected was entirely deliberate. He looked up the kit that evening. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. He hadn't let himself think about it directly, approaching it the way you might approach something bright, from the side. But he found the team's supplier easily enough, clicked through to the girls' section without quite deciding to, and sat looking at the screen for a long time. The uniform was simple: a navy skirt, short and pleated, and a white polo shirt with the school crest. Matching navy briefs shown beneath the skirt in the product photo. White socks to the knee. Simple. Practical. Entirely ordinary in the context of a netball team. Jamie looked at it for a long time. The feeling that moved through him was not the feeling he'd braced for. It wasn't dread, or the hot discomfort of embarrassment, or the voice that usually arrived to tell him something wasn't for him. It was something closer to recognition. He closed his laptop without quite closing the thought, and lay in the dark for a while, and tried to work out what to do with the fact that, when he'd looked at that image, the person he'd seen wearing it hadn't been someone else. It was Priya who noticed first. She had a talent for it, not intrusive, not probing, just quietly observant in the way of someone who had learned early that most people will tell you what they need to if you simply leave enough space. They were sitting on the floor of the sports hall after Tuesday's session, backs against the wall, while Mrs. Osler locked away the equipment. The others had filtered out in 1s and 2s. It was the particular comfortable quiet that settles after exercise, when nobody needs to perform anymore. Priya was retying her trainers. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Danny said she talked to you. She mentioned the friendly," Jamie said carefully, "and the kit." He didn't answer immediately, which was, he supposed, an answer. Priya finished with her laces and settled her arms across her knees. She still wasn't looking at him directly, which he was beginning to understand was a kindness she offered people, giving them somewhere to look that wasn't her face while they worked things out. "I don't know if I'd look..." He started. "You'd look like someone in a netball kit," Priya said. Not dismissively, just simply. "That's not..." He stopped. Tried again. "People would see. People see us every match. It's different." Priya was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, someone was laughing about something, the sound bouncing off the walls and fading. "Is it the wearing it?" she said. "Or is it people seeing you wear it?" The question landed with a precision that Jamie hadn't prepared for. He looked at the far wall, at the painted lines on the floor, at his own hands. "The second one," he said, eventually. And then, because something about the empty sports hall and the quality of Priya's attention made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. "I don't think it's the first one." Priya nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd been holding lightly for a while. "People are going to see you play," she said. "They're going to see that you're good. Some of them are going to think it's weird because you're a boy on a girls' team. They might say something. She paused. That's going to happen with or without the skirt. The skirt doesn't make it more true. Jamie turned that over. The girls on the team, he said. Do they? Nobody cares, Priya said. I mean that genuinely, not as a nice thing to say. Danny wants to win the friendly. Roshni thinks you're funny. Meg asked me last week if you were going to sign the form. She glanced at him sideways. The kit question is really just practical to them. Just not to me. Just not to you, she agreed, without judgment. A pause. Mrs. Osler's footsteps crossed the hall toward the far exit. Can I ask you something? Priya said. Jamie nodded. When you thought about it, the kit, what was the first feeling? Before the second one came in, he should have deflected. He'd had a lot of practice at deflecting, but the question had arrived so quietly, and Priya was looking at the middle distance so carefully that deflecting felt like more effort than it was worth. It felt normal, he said. Like the right kind of normal. Priya smiled at that, small and private, directed mostly at the floor. Okay, she said. She stood up and swung her bag onto her shoulder. That's a good thing to know about yourself. She said it the way you might note that the weather was due to change factually, without drama, as useful information to have going forward. Then she headed for the door. Tuesday, she said, over her shoulder. Tuesday, Jamie said. He sat on the floor of the empty sports hall for another few minutes after she'd gone. The lights hummed. Somewhere outside, someone was calling across the field. The right kind of normal. He hadn't said that to anyone before. He wasn't entirely sure he'd said it to himself. The form was a single sheet of A4, printed on school letterhead and left in his hand by Mrs. Osler at the end of Thursday's session, with the same matter-of-fact economy she applied to everything. No pressure, she said. But I'll need it by Monday if you're playing the friendly. He folded it in half without looking at it and put it in his bag. He looked at it that evening at his desk, smoothed flat under the lamp. It was almost aggressively ordinary. Name, year group, emergency contact, medical information, signature. A permission slip, essentially. The kind of form that existed in the dozens in every drawer of every house, with a child in a school sport. There was a line at the top that read Girls Netball Team Player Registration, and that was the only place it differed from any other form he'd ever filled in. He read that line several times. Then he picked up a pen and wrote his name in the first box. James Arthur Calloway, in his normal handwriting, slightly cramped the way it always was, the J looping back on itself. He filled in the year group, the emergency contact, his mum, her mobile number, automatic. He paused at the medical information box, wrote none, and moved to the signature line. He signed it. He put the pen down and looked at what he'd done. It was just a form, a piece of paper. It meant Tuesday and Thursday lunchtimes, and the friendly in 3 weeks, and Mrs. Osler's measured assessments of his positioning. That was all it meant. He folded it carefully, found an envelope in the desk drawer, and wrote Mrs. Osler on the front in clear letters. Then, he opened his laptop. He ordered the kit that night. The process was straightforward, which he hadn't expected. Somehow he'd imagined obstacles, complications, some mechanism by which the ordinary act of purchasing would become complicated. But it was just a website, and a size guide, and a basket, and a confirmation email arriving in his inbox 11 seconds later, with a delivery date of Saturday. He read the confirmation email twice. Then he closed the laptop and went to bed, and lay in the dark thinking about nothing in particular, which was how he usually processed things that felt too large to think about directly. The parcel arrived Saturday morning while his mum was at the supermarket. He'd planned it that way, without admitting he'd planned it. He took it upstairs unopened, set it on the bed, and looked at it for a moment. The brown packaging, the tape, his name and address printed on the label in clean logistics font, ordinary. He opened it carefully, folding back the packaging rather than tearing it, which he recognised as the behaviour of someone who wanted to be able to reverse a decision and was also aware they weren't going to. The kit was folded neatly inside, navy and white, smaller than it looked on screen, more real. He lifted out the skirt first. It was lighter than he expected, a soft pleated fabric that moved when he held it, settled into its own shape. He turned it over in his hands. It was just a garment, a practical piece of sports kit designed for movement and ease. That was all it was. He put it on the bed and picked up the polo shirt, shook it out, laid it alongside. He stood there for a moment. Then, with the particular decisiveness of someone who has been very slowly making a decision for several weeks, he changed. The mirror on the back of his wardrobe door was slightly too high, which meant he had to step back further than felt comfortable to see himself properly. He stepped back. He looked. The skirt sat at mid-thigh, the pleats falling neatly. The polo shirt was fitted in the way of sports kit, neat across the shoulders. The school crest sat on the left chest, white socks to the knee. He'd pulled his hair back without thinking about it. It was long enough to need it during sport, and that small practical detail completed something he hadn't known was incomplete. He looked at himself for a long time. The person looking back didn't seem to require any adjustment, didn't seem like a joke or a mistake or a thing requiring explanation, just a person in a netball kit, with their hair back, standing in a bedroom on a Saturday morning. The feeling was so quiet he almost missed it. Not triumph, not revelation, nothing so large or declared as that. Just a stillness, a settling, the specific ease of something slotting into its correct position, like a word you've been reaching for arriving finally in a sentence, making it make sense. The right kind of normal. He stood there for a while, not performing anything, not rehearsing anything, just standing, just being looked at, by himself, without flinching. Outside a car went past. Downstairs the boiler clicked on. The ordinary world continued at its ordinary pace, entirely indifferent to the fact that something had quietly shifted in a bedroom on the first floor. He didn't take the kit off straight away. He sat on the edge of the bed in it, and picked up his phone, and put his phone down again. He wasn't ready to name anything yet. Naming felt like a different conversation, one that lived further down a road he'd only just found the entrance to. That was all right. He didn't need to name it today. Today he'd signed a form and tried on a kit, and discovered that the person in the mirror looked, straightforwardly and without drama, like themselves. That felt like enough. Friday evening, he'd meant to hide the kit. Not permanently, just until he'd worked out how to introduce the subject, which he'd been intending to do for approximately 10 days, and hadn't. It was still in the delivery bag, tucked under his bed in what he'd told himself was a temporary arrangement. His mum found it on Friday evening while hoovering his room, which she did with an efficiency that had always defeated his attempts at privacy. He came upstairs to find her sitting on the edge of his bed with the kit folded neatly in her lap. The bag was beside her. She'd refolded everything. He noticed the skirt on top, the polo shirt beneath, the socks paired. He stopped in the doorway. His mum looked up. She had the expression she sometimes wore when she'd been thinking carefully about something and had arrived somewhere she wanted to be gentle with. "Netball," she said. "I've joined the school team," Jamie said. "There's a match tomorrow." "I know." Mrs. Osler emailed the parents. A small pause. "I've known about the Tuesday and Thursday sessions for a while, love." Jamie leaned against the doorframe. "You didn't say anything. I was waiting for you to." She looked down at the kit in her lap, smoothed an invisible crease from the skirt. "I didn't want to make it into something before you were ready for it to be something." The room was quiet. Outside, a bird was making an unreasonable amount of noise on a roof. "It might not be anything," Jamie said, carefully. It might just be netball." His mum nodded. Her face said, of course, in a way that also said, "I know my child." "It might just be netball," she agreed, with a composure that told him she had probably sat with this for longer than he realised. Long enough to have moved through whatever she needed to move through and arrive at this calm and present and refolding his kit on the edge of his bed on a Friday evening. "The skirt's part of the uniform," Jamie said. "The team uniform. It's just what they wear. I know what netball kit looks like." She looked at him directly then, and her expression was so straightforward and without agenda that he felt something loosen in his chest, without warning. "You look like yourself lately, you know, these past few weeks. I don't know if you've noticed." He hadn't, or he had, and hadn't known she could see it too. "The match is at St. Catherine's," he said, because he needed to say something practical before the moment became too large. 10 o'clock. I'll drive you." She stood and held out the kit. He took it from her. Their hands were close for a moment in the handover. "Mum..." "You don't have to say anything yet," she said quietly. There's no rush on anything. She picked up the hoover and moved on to the landing with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had just handled something important by treating it, mostly, as ordinary. Which was, Jamie thought, exactly the right way to handle it. He stood holding the kit for a moment, then he went to hang it on the wardrobe door, so it would be ready in the morning. Saturday, St. Catherine's, the changing room at St. Catherine's smelled of hairspray and the particular nervous energy of girls who wanted to win. Jamie had expected it to feel strange, stepping into a space that had never been intended for him, that every instinct from years of school had told him was not his to enter. But Danny had simply held the door and said, "Come on then," and that had been that. He changed quickly, not from embarrassment, but from habit, the habit of taking up less room than you were entitled to, which he was dimly aware was something he did in most situations. The kit felt the same as it had in his bedroom, right and light and his. Roshni, who was adjusting her hair in the mirror, caught his reflection and gave him a thumbs up with the casual warmth of someone welcoming a person to a place they'd already decided belonged to them too. Meg passed him a hair tie without being asked, apparently simply noticing that he needed one, and he took it and used it and felt the small, unremarkable rightness of that. Mrs. Osler gathered them just before they went out. "St. Catherine's are quick," she said. "They'll press high and they'll expect it to work. It won't work if we move the ball early and we think ahead." She looked around the group. "We know what we're doing. Let's go and do it. Simple. Sufficient." They filed out into the corridor. Danny fell into step beside Jamie. "You all right?" she said. Jamie considered the question properly, which he didn't always do when people asked it. The kit sat easily on him. His hair was back. His team moved around him in the corridor, with the comfortable proximity of people who had made room for him and stopped noticing they'd done it. "Yeah," he said. And then, because it was Danny and she dealt in straight lines, "Actually, yeah. Not just saying it." Danny nodded, satisfied. "Good. I need you at wing attack from the start. Their centre is slow off the mark, and you'll see the gaps before she does." And just like that, they were through the doors and onto the court, into the clean, flat light of a Saturday morning, and there were people in the stands, parents, a few students, a scattering of St. Catherine's girls in matching hoodies, and Jamie was standing on a netball court in kit, visible and present and entirely himself. And the world did not end. It did not end at all. In fact, Mrs. Osler blew the whistle, and the ball went up, and Jamie moved to exactly where it needed to go before it arrived. They were 2 goals down at half-time. Not badly down, not a deficit that meant everything was over, but St. Catherine's centre had found her rhythm in the second quarter, and their goal shooter was clinical in a way that had quietly unsettled the team's shape. Mrs. Osler gathered them in a tight circle and spoke without urgency. "We're rushing the last pass," she said. "We're 1 move ahead of ourselves. Slow the build down, find the space, then use it." She looked at Jamie. "They're leaving your channel open. They don't know what to do with you there yet. Use that." He nodded. "Their centre is compensating left," she continued. "Which means the right channel opens when she moves," Jamie said, without thinking. Mrs. Osler looked at him with the fractional expression that served her as a smile. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." The third quarter was different. Jamie could feel the shift, not in effort but in clarity, the way the court seemed to slow down and make itself legible. He found himself reading 2 moves ahead, his body already moving into position while the play was still forming, arriving at places that surprised the St. Catherine's defence because they hadn't known to close them yet. He set up 3 goals in 7 minutes. Clean passes, well-weighted, dropping perfectly into Danny's hands or finding Roshni on the cut. Not spectacular. Better than spectacular, useful, precise, the kind of play that made the people around him better. The equaliser came through him. A long diagonal from Priya, collected cleanly, a quarter turn, and Jamie could see the entire court in that half-second. Danny marked tightly, Roshni double-covered, and Meg making a run to the left that nobody had tracked yet. He found Meg. Meg shot. It went in. The bench erupted. But the moment came later, 3 minutes from time. 1 goal down, the ball turning over, St. Catherine's pressing high to run the clock. Priya won the ball back with a determination that had some steel in it, straightened up, looked for options. Everyone was marked. Almost everyone. Jamie had read the play before it developed, had seen the St. Catherine's centre ball watching rather than marking, had drifted into the space her inattention left, and was standing in a channel that had simply not been closed because nobody had thought he'd be there. The ball arrived. He was outside the shooting circle, further out than was comfortable, further than he'd attempted in a match. In training, he'd taken this shot twice, converted it once. There was no time to weigh it. He turned, set, lifted his eyes to the goal in the particular way Mrs. Osler had taught them, not at the ring, but through it, as if the ball was already on the other side. He shot. The ball described a clean arc against the grey Saturday sky. It came down through the net without touching the rim. The sound from his team was unlike anything that had preceded it. Not just noisiness, something more physical than that. Danny's voice above the rest. A wordless sound of pure release. Roshni, with both hands in the air. Priya turning a full circle on the spot, as if she needed to distribute the feeling across her whole body. Even Mrs. Osler, on the touchline, permitted herself something that briefly resembled an expression. And then, they were around him. Danny's arm across his shoulders, Roshni gripping his arm, Meg saying, "Are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me?" with a delight so genuine it was almost indignant. He was at the centre of a circle of noise and warmth, and he stood in it, and didn't deflect, didn't diminish it, didn't do the thing he usually did, where he made himself smaller so a moment would pass more quickly. He stood in it. He let it be about him. They won by one. The final whistle went, and for a moment everyone simply stopped, that suspended second, before celebration arrives. And then, it arrived, fully, and the team became a single moving thing. A huddle of navy and white and noise that pulled Jamie in without question or ceremony. Someone was jumping. Several people were jumping. Danny had her face in her hands in the way of someone overwhelmed by their own relief. Mrs. Osler was shaking hands with the St. Catherine's coach, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had known, more or less, how this would go. Eventually, the huddle loosened into something warmer and less frantic. They found their way to the side of the court, collected water bottles, began the gentle come-down of a team after a win. Jamie sat on the bench between Priya and Roshni. His legs felt light and distant. His hair had come half out of the tie during the last quarter, and he pushed it back from his face with both hands. Roshni leaned against his shoulder briefly, easy and unself-conscious, the way she would with any teammate. Priya passed him her water without being asked. "That shot," Danny said, from further down the bench, shaking her head slowly. "I'm going to be furious about that shot for weeks." "Furious," Jamie said, "because I've been playing since year 4 and I wouldn't have taken it." She looked at him with an expression of genuine, aggrieved admiration. "First season. Unbelievable. Technically, it's my first match," Jamie said. "Don't," said Danny. Laughter moved down the bench. Easy, warm, inclusive laughter that Jamie was inside rather than adjacent to, and the distinction felt enormous. Later, while the others had went to the changing rooms, Jamie sat for a moment alone on the bench. The court was emptying. A caretaker was folding away the scorer's table. The St. Catherine's girls had retreated inside, gracious in defeat, and the stands were clearing into the car park. His mum would be waiting somewhere out there, and he'd walk out to her in a minute and she'd ask how it went, and he'd say good and probably not much else, and that would be all right, because she'd understand that good was carrying more than its usual weight. He looked down at the kit, the navy skirt, the school crest, the white socks with a grass stain on the left one from a stumble in the second half, worn now, and real, not the careful image from a laptop screen at night, not the private reflection in a wardrobe mirror, but an actual kit that had been played in, that had a result attached to it, that had been seen by people in stands who had watched him move and hadn't seen anything other than a player on a team. He thought about the huddle, about Roshni's shoulder against his, about being at the centre of the noise after the shot and staying there, not shrinking, about the particular way it felt to be gathered in rather than accommodated. He wasn't ready to say everything yet. There was a longer road ahead of him, and he knew it, could sense its shape even if he couldn't yet see where it led. There would be conversations he didn't have words for yet, questions he wasn't sure how to ask, a whole language to slowly learn. But he was on the team. He had a position, and a kit, and teammates who passed him water and leaned on his shoulder. And he knew, sitting on a bench at someone else's school, grass on his sock, hair loose around his face, he knew, in the quiet way of something that has been true for a long time finally being acknowledged, that he was at the beginning of something. Not the end of confusion, not the arrival at easy answers, the beginning of being, slowly and on his own terms, more fully himself. That was enough for today.